All righty. So one more time, welcome to Black Women in Philanthropy. Where are we now? A webinar brought to you by BlackHer and Giving Compass. We're so excited that you're here today, and we're so excited that we're graced with the brilliance of these wonderful panelists. I'm Jocelyn Harmon, co-founder of BlackHer, and I'll be your facilitator for today. So today we are lucky to hear from three Black women who are experts in the field of philanthropy. We have Ashindi Maxton, who is the executive director of the Donors of Color Network, Lisa Hall, who's impact chair at Apollo Global Management, and Valaida Fullwood, who's principal architect, and I love this, vision keeper at the Soul of Philanthropy. I'm going to give you a little bit of background, and then we're going to jump in. So in 2019, BlackHer and Giving Compass partnered to develop Black Women Give, a virtual magazine, and the Black Women's Guide to Philanthropy. Our goals were threefold. One, to expand the definition of philanthropy and by extension, who is a philanthropist. Two, to highlight amazing Black women, like these Black women, doing this work. Three, to highlight the importance of giving Black in order to advance prosperity in Black communities. Because unfortunately, Black people, especially Black women and girls, have been shortchanged by philanthropy. According to research by the Philanthropic Initiative for Racial Equity, in 2016, less than 1% of the $26 billion given in US grants went to women and girls of color. So let me say that again. In 2016, less than 1% of the $26 billion given in US grant dollars went to women and girls of color. So as part of our efforts, we shared each of your stories, but as we know, a whole lot has changed in the past 2 years. Now, philanthropy is having a reckoning. High-profile corporations like Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan Chase, institutions like Ford, and individuals like Mackenzie Scott are making big public investments in us. Nonprofit advocates and folks inside of philanthropy are also suggesting ways that philanthropy must change to interrupt racial and gender inequity. And we're also seeing more Black women being appointed to positions of power, like several of you here, and leading in institutional and individual philanthropy. In short, more folks seem to be listening to what we've been saying for a long time. One, philanthropy has a critical role to play in advancing equity for Black women and girls. And two, in order to live up to its potential and responsibility, philanthropy must reckon with the ways that its systems, processes, and governance have embedded racism and sexism. I'm excited to catch up with you today. We can all catch our breath and try to make sense of the past few years and determine where we're headed as a field. So let's just jump right in. So this is a question for all of you, but how do you define philanthropy and why does it matter for Black women and girls?
I'll jump in. Thanks, Jocelyn. I define philanthropy, I reclaim the root meaning, love of humanity, love of humankind, love of what it means to be human. And in my work, we really advance the idea that philanthropy is deeper than your pockets. So much in how you explained it in your introduction, a lot of the work is around reframing portraits of philanthropists and reclaiming the root meaning of philanthropy. And centering love.
I love that.
So I'm glad to jump in and share my definition of philanthropy, which is really about giving back and investing in the welfare of others, supporting and promoting the common good. And my work in impact investing is one way to achieve that goal. I think philanthropy is traditionally thought of as charity or donations, where you're contributing all of the money for a cause without any expectation that that money will be returned. And in impact investing, we stretch the definition of philanthropy to include investments where you will actually have a return of your capital or a return of the investment that you make and a return on that investment so that you earn interest or receive some type of dividend along the way. And I'm sure later we can get into a little bit about the advantages of impact investing and the advantages of philanthropy as a donation or charity. And thank you so much for having me here today, Jocelyn. Very excited to be part of this conversation today.
Of course, thank you, Lisa. Ashindi.
All right. So at Donors of Color, we really just talk more about giving than using the word philanthropy. And Donors of Color is a cross-racial group of people of color who are committed to systemic racial justice. So that's what we do. One of the things that we did before we launched this network 2 years ago was we did almost 3 years of research on people of color and their giving, and learned that most communities of color, this is Latinos, Asian Americans, Black folks, Native Americans, don't tend to use the word philanthropy. And in some cases, especially, for example, in Native communities, philanthropy has often been disguised as white supremacy in action, like the boarding schools were philanthropic. And so, we're really cautious about how that word is loaded and how it often erases a lot of the ways that people of color give. And one of the things we saw in our research is, not surprising to anyone on this call, but every culture has a culture of giving, every one of them. And often in communities of color in this country, the giving is to families, it's to friends, it's to, people near you who are in need. And we like to include that in our definition of, what people are doing as just giving. And we're here, hoping to shift the center of gravity in politics and philanthropy towards racial justice. But we use the word giving more to describe what we're doing than we do the word philanthropy.
I love that. And I feel like one of the original studies maybe that Kellogg helped to fund was called Cultures of Giving, looking at different ways folks give in the South. So that's lovely. That's lovely. So let's go the other way. And so tell me, and maybe this is a silly question, but I always just like to level set with people why this thing called giving, philanthropy, impact investing, why it's important for Black women and girls. And let's start with you, Ashindi.
All right. I mean, it's important for everyone, but it's, but especially for the folks who have the most space to make up in this culture, so I think one of the things that's interesting to me about how little philanthropic giving goes to all communities of color, but especially, the stat you gave about Black women and girls, there are just so many appalling statistics in philanthropy when you break it down into who it's going to. And if you really want to get people to think about it, you have to say, what is the point of philanthropy? And if it's not to even the field, if it's not to actually help the people who, need the most help for various structural reasons, then what really is the point? And, so for us, I think it really is like, this is, in thinking about how we make systemic change, how we achieve racial justice, it's saying like Black women and girls are suffering from racism, they're suffering from misogyny, they're suffering from all kinds of, centuries of oppression of both women and Black people in this country. And that means that they need to be targeted for greater resources. And we really look for that just to find the ways to create opportunity that aren't happening naturally in this society. That's
Yeah. And I would love to follow on to that answer because I think it does, the importance of giving for Black women and Black girls is directly tied to the depth and the breadth of problems that we're facing as a society, as a global society. And when you think about the enormity of the social and environmental problems that we're facing, it demands that we address them. And that we think about the common good. And we know that Black women and Black girls are disparately impacted by the problems of climate change, as an example, by the challenge of economic inequity, by pandemics. We've seen, very squarely how there's been a disparate impact on women and people of color And even when you think beyond the direct impacts of the pandemic in terms of illness and sickness and mortality, and thinking about the impact that the pandemic has had on working women, which again, disproportionately Black women make up the working women population. And so the impact on children staying at home and the need for childcare and the burden that's carried by women, and specifically Black women, and the impact that that has on Black girls. And I think the need for philanthropy is greater than it's ever been.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would add that the reason I'm in this work and really advancing this is because I believe you can't be what you don't see. And since the word philanthropy and ideas around philanthropy have been hijacked for the last century or so to only focus on ultra wealthy white men generally, I think it's really important to lift up our stories. As you know, it's Black Philanthropy Month, and where we celebrate giving in all of its forms, Afro-descendant giving in all its forms. And Black women and girls have played such a significant role in framing what is philanthropy, what is American philanthropy here in the States, and lifting up our stories, connecting us to that word philanthropy and our generosity, our giving back. It's all part of the same thing in spirit. And we played instrumental roles in so many movements in our 400 years here in the US, and have been erased from so many of those stories. And so I think it's important to lift up and celebrate, to rediscover women like, so many come to mind, from Sojourner Truth to Frances Harper to Georgia Gilmore, and so many other women that if you Google them, or if we have a chance later on to share bits of their stories. Catherine Ferguson also comes to mind, Black women who oftentimes sacrificed and gave what they did not have the benefit of having, whether it was freedom or literacy or opportunity. And so lifting up our stories is critical, and bringing that blueprint into today's discussions to address the complex issues women and girls, Black women and girls face today.
Yeah, yeah.
Jocelyn, can I just lift up what Valaida has done that I think is so wonderful in making this tradition of giving really visible. And it really is this hidden force in our cultures, like the giving that Black women in particular have done. And so I love seeing us on both sides of the equation. Like, we want to see Black women and girls funded, and then we also want to see ourselves as the givers that we actually are. And so just the photos, the finding of the heroes, all of that uplifting Valaida, like, it really just matters. And I just want to thank you for that work.
Yeah, amen. Well, so I want to know what it's like then to be a Black woman in philanthropy, because let's continue this theme, because I know you all, a little bit. Lisa and I are close friends, but I don't really know what it's like to be in a field, let's be honest, that, is undergoing tremendous shift, is maybe not there yet. So what is it like to be one of these people who now we can look to say, oh, I could do that, or I would like to do that, or that could be the role for me?
So I was pausing because I saw Ashindi off mute, but I'm glad to weigh in here. I think, it is a tremendous responsibility, and we have responsibilities as leaders in this field to model what's possible. I think from a career standpoint, for people coming behind us to make it clear that there are career pathways here in this work. And you can't be what you don't see, as was said earlier, right? It's really about modeling for other Black women that there are opportunities to be successful in philanthropic initiatives and impact investing. And I think the other piece of it is the influence that we can have in these roles, right? That we bring a point of view, a perspective that is often unique in these environments. And that's part of the responsibility, is to voice the point, to raise the issue that might not be on anybody else's plate, right? Nobody else is thinking about it in the room, in the conversation, at the conference, and that it's really important as Black women that we represent these views so that they are introduced into the discussion and they're considered. And I think often there are issues that don't get considered because the room is not diverse enough. And so I feel very fortunate to be in a position to be able to voice those perspectives and those views as one of the few people of color and women working in the field of impact investing.
I can pick up from Lisa there. It's a huge privilege and also a huge burden. A lot sits with you when you're in those rooms and when you're the only person who has access to those rooms, who carries your perspective. So I'm going to say, like, when you ask the question, like, what's it like to be a Black woman in philanthropy? My first thought was exhausting. It's really exhausting. It's not made for us. Like, the spaces are not made for us. And even though all of the language is very much about inclusion and, certainly like racial justice particularly was on trend in like this time last year, like there's a lot of rhetoric around it. But when you are the only person in the room upholding a view that you are upholding by yourself, and when you are a person who people don't expect to be the face of authority or power, because they're not used to seeing Black women in anything but a helping role, the ways that plays out, or they play like it takes a toll.
Yeah.
A real toll. And philanthropy is a form of power, that you're distributing resources where they are tremendously scarce. And so it's why, it's an incredible privilege and it's so important. I never pictured myself going into philanthropy. And once I accidentally fell backwards into it, I was like, which is really what happened. But once I was there, I was like, oh, wow, the work that gets done is the work that gets funded. And
yeah, you've said that. And I think that is, yes.
And so sitting in these spaces where you get to make sure that like that kind of work gets resourced, people on this call probably know Color of Change. And when I first met the founder of Color of Change, the people that I worked for, the all white donors for the most part, did not see the value of this organization because it didn't touch them. They didn't, it was really very invisible to them, like, one, why it mattered, two, that the leaders were not people that they met at cocktail parties or who spoke like them. And it was really difficult to get them to invest in Color of Change at the point that it was a startup. And for me, it was like, you have this demonstrated record of impact, you have a demonstrated, like, incredibly accomplished leader, you've already got a track record. And if this person can't get funded, how much harder is it for somebody who didn't, manage to gather the resources to, get their startup off the ground? So the ability to create that kind of opportunity and to help these organizations sustain is super valuable. And then if I can add just a quick part too, right now we are doing at Donors of Color a climate campaign, which is aimed at the top 40 climate funders. And only 1.3% of climate funding goes to organizations led by people of color. 1.3%. I mean, like, any stat you dig into when you start to disaggregate by race becomes pretty appalling. And this is one of them. And, we decided to use the voice and influence of our donors to have access to those top 40 funders. And so I have met with me or my team, including our brilliant climate director, Danielle Dean, who is a Black woman. We have met with 37 of the top 40 climate funders. And in those 37 meetings, I have never seen a Black person. Never. Small handful of women, maybe 2 women of color, and mostly white men. So when you get to the people who are making decisions about how to resource the solving of the climate crisis, it's white men who are mostly funding other white men. And we now have a planet in incredible crisis because you've marginalized the people who have the most to gain and who are your power source for radical change that actually is going to do what we need to do to save the planet. We disconnected because you couldn't see our community. So it's not just a equity issue. It's an actual, like, you have built a failed strategy because the decision makers have such massive blind spots around people of color. But like actually getting to visually see who the top decision makers in the climate world are. And I'm like, yeah, that has incredible repercussions for all of us.
Yeah. Valaida, what's it like for you?
Yeah, well, I'll say that just the fact that I'm included on a panel with that title suggests some shifts that have occurred in philanthropy. Given that I'm not a Black woman of great financial wealth, I don't lead a foundation, I'm not a program officer, I'm a member of a philanthropic collective or giving circle. And through my work in writing about Black philanthropy, have been accepted or included. I mean, there's historically a very clear delineation on who's in philanthropy and who's not. And even still in my role, I'm on the fringes. So I appreciate your including me in this conversation. And in fact, it was the observations made by Lisa and Ashindi earlier that inspired me to write the book, Giving Back. I worked as a consultant in philanthropy, oftentimes, to evaluate projects or working with nonprofits in the field in writing grants or assessing grants, and was always struck by the fact that Black people were excluded from much of the story and narrative and imagery in philanthropy. And when we were on the recipient side, we were in need, we were only beneficiaries. And so knowing a different story and having experienced and witnessing the philanthropy, the everyday philanthropy in my community in North Carolina, I was inspired to write a book to really elevate our stories and shed light on Black philanthropy, which I often remind people, it's not just Black people giving, it's of a tradition, a heritage, a culture, and beliefs all behind when we say Black philanthropy. So just like a Black person cooking is not soul food, necessarily, a Black person giving is not necessarily Black philanthropy in terms of when I say it, in terms of what I mean. And I'm happy for the opportunity to have spent 4.5 years talking to 200 Black donors across the country to hear what inspires them, what motivates them to give back, and hopefully to begin bridging that chasm that Ashindi spoke to earlier, that we don't use the term historically as philanthropy, and bridging that giving back, that generosity that we know and just how we do, that is in fact in a form of philanthropy and has helped frame what we know as American philanthropy. So I know it is, as mentioned earlier, it's not easy. It's constantly swimming upstream. This is not a sector. These are not institutions or systems that were meant to include us as benefactors, as influential, as powerful. And so operating in this space, particularly as a Black woman, is exhausting. And it's the recognition that the work is essential and that you can affect change through your presence and through your voice that keeps me going and keeps me at the table and creating new tables and providing spaces where I see more Black women.
That's great. That's great. So I see we have a question and we'll try to get to it, but I have so many more questions for this, ladies. So let's talk for a minute. I want to talk a little bit about impact investing, because I think that this is, an area that could be very interesting for individuals. And it's another tool, right, in the toolbox in terms of how to get resources to folks. And it also, my sense is this can be pretty substantial amounts of money. So, I mean, Lisa, can you give us sort of a 101 on, what this tool is and how you use it at Apollo and how it can help Black women and girls?
Absolutely. And impact investing is a tool in the toolkit to think about when you're trying to achieve social good. And it differs from direct charity or donations because you actually get a return of your money. So it's a real investment that has a social or environmental outcome. And you get the money returned to you, and you get some type of return on your money. And examples of industries where impact investments are often made include education and healthcare. These are areas where revenue is generated that can return capital on an investment that is made for a capital intensive effort or to grow a business. And the revenue that's generated from that business goes to return capital that gets put in front that could be used to build a building. An example might be a charter school, or it can be used to buy equipment that are very intensive uses of money. So a lot's needed up front. And then the revenue that's generated gets paid back to the investor. And there are really three pieces that define impact investing that we talk about in this approach to investing. So one is that there is some type of net positive impact or social outcome or environmental outcome. The second is that impact is measurable, that you can actually set an objective about what you're trying to achieve, whether that's in healthcare, patients having positive health outcomes and getting healthier, or if it's in education, students actually learning in the classroom and being able to use that learning to improve their wages or to achieve higher literacy. And so measurability is really important. And then the third piece is that you actually do get your money back. And that's why it's so powerful as a tool, because you get that money back and then it can be recycled for all kinds of purposes. And typically you're in a better position to make an investment. And it can be at any income level, at any asset level. There are lots of products out there that are available across a range of amounts of investing and the time period in which your money gets returned. So it can be a very flexible tool in the toolkit for those looking to achieve positive social good that may not have the ability to do all of their giving and all of their philanthropy through donations or charity.
Yeah, it feels like it could bring, it's another source of, it could bring another group of folks or another market into this giving work too, right? Which is really interesting.
Yeah, and it's very exciting in my work at Apollo. We're really bringing impact investing to scale. Impact investing has been around for a long time. Affordable housing is another example of impact investing where you're investing for social good. And it's been around for decades, and folks have been investing in affordable housing. And the work that we're doing at Apollo is thinking about how do you bring this field to a true scale so that bigger players, more capital is coming to the table to build and grow and expand businesses that focus on impact, that focus on positive social and environmental outcomes. So it's very exciting to have the opportunity at Apollo to move things to scale.
Yeah. So Ashindi, my sense is that if impact investing is one lens, right, for giving, I'm not going to call it philanthropy anymore, Valaida, or Ashindi, it's giving from now on to me. That what you do at Donors of Color Network is a more traditional form of philanthropy in the sense that you have a donor, you have folks who come together around an issue and give their own, their personal money and maybe leverage some of their, corporate matches or as such to make investments. One thing, you've told us a little bit about the climate campaign, which is amazing, and how you being in that seat now is going to transform things for grassroots orgs led by people of color who do climate work. But I think you also, I'm curious about your lens on, I think the climate is not the first issue folks necessarily think of when they think of the issues facing Black women and girls, but I feel like you're also telling everybody, hey, actually every issue is our issue. And so I just don't know.
We live on a planet.
Yeah, well, I know, but it feels like sometimes there's, you know, that's not the first thing maybe that comes to mind. So I'm just curious how you think with donors about that, right? Because I imagine some of your donors say, love what you're doing, but climate isn't my thing, or why climate, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I will say again, we all live on a planet, and if we mess it up, like Black women and girls are going to suffer first and hardest, and really already have. And I'll give you the example that, like, his, I didn't come to this back with a climate background at all, but I do spend a lot of time in South Africa. Johannesburg is a second home. And one of the things I saw was when there was a massive drought in Cape Town, they turned off the water to the townships. They turned it off. And they were like, we don't know how it happened. And I was like, they will literally let those people die. Like, they will literally let the poor Black people in the townships die if it comes to that. And it just really hit me so deeply that, when it comes to climate crisis, it can look like Katrina. It can look like when we were getting shot at from bridges, for trying to escape. It can look like Maria with a president who's throwing paper towels at us. It can look like Cape Town, where the townships are left to literally not have the water they need to survive. Or we can take power that we proactively now are saying, we're not going to accept this. And it has to look different than that. And we have to think further ahead to know that, these are millions of lives on the line, and we will be hit first and hardest. So I just wanted to frame with that. In terms of our donors have so many interests. And, one of the things we started doing at our first conference was we just mapped them. We said, and I did talk about climate from the very first time I ever addressed our donors at our beginning conference. This was very deeply on my mind, specifically because I know it's not traditionally seen as an issue affecting people of color, which is also a failure of funding people of color to talk about climate to our communities. Like, it's really a self-perpetuating cycle that we have to interrupt. But also because, if we don't get climate right, like, nothing else will matter. Right. Everything else will be very peripheral when you're drowning in a flood or, like trying to escape a wildfire. But we did ask our donors, at that first conference where their energy was, and we wanted to do programming that fit that energy. And the top 4 things they told us was that they were interested in democracy, reform, and politics. They were interested in climate, although given I had put my finger on the scale, talked to them a lot about it. They were interested in culture, like culture as equity, and they were interested in impact investing. And so in our first year, we spun up working groups for our donors on all 4 of those topics. And there was real energy and such potential. Lisa, I really especially feel it in the impact investing space, like what we could do there, and how much energy there is to like align their dollars with their values. But we realized fairly quickly as a startup that we could not do 4 kinds of campaigns effectively. Yeah. And this is also why I say, it's important to understand the mission, which is that because we're trying to shift systemic levers, like we're trying to pull the biggest levers we can. Right. We didn't want to do a bunch of small stuff at a scale that didn't matter very much. So we decided to focus on one campaign at a time. So in 2020, which was an election year, we focused on our politics and democracy work. And we did what I'm super proud of, with state ledge candidates, the most diverse set of state legislative candidates ever in history won last year. And this was a place we were focused. That was an externality of a lot of things, a lot of spending, a lot of work by people of color. But it's the untold story of the 2020 election that we have a historic number of people of color in state houses, which is also where like Stacey Abrams, Rashida Tlaib, like it's, such a huge clearinghouse for our people to rise to greater political power. So we want to get those folks elected, and also just matters in terms of quality of life. So that's what we did last year. This year, the climate campaign has been a focus. We're finding our power even more. And unexpectedly, I think I didn't expect the amount of press that this campaign got. So it's been in Fast Company and Forbes and like just really like big press, the Washington Post multiple times, the Associated Press has covered it twice. And so it has kind of created this perception that we are a climate network, which we're not, because we want to turn soon to impact investing. We also want to turn to more culture work, and we have all of those interests. We have people who are interested in education. We have people who are interested in spirituality as a way of making change. And we want to give all those people the tools that they need. But we've realized that when we're collectively doing something, we can only do so many things well at once.
Nice, nice. What I love is you're figuring out the intersections of all of these issues, right? Which we all knew, but I guess you're just pretty explicit about it, which is wonderful. And then Valaida, your tool, you have your own tool. You're the Giving Circle girl. I hope you don't mind if I say that.
Not at all.
I know that I can't read next generation philanthropist, is that right?
New generation.
New
of
generation.
African
But in North Carolina, I'm going strong, I feel like for 12 years or something like that. So
15 years.
15. Clearly I didn't do my research. But yeah, tell us about that, because that's I mean, that's a big, I don't think I've done much for 15 years except maybe stay married to my husband. And even that's been a challenge.
I say that joining a giving circle and helping found a giving circle changed my life. It set me off on a whole new trajectory and a whole path I never anticipated. So for folks who are unfamiliar with giving circles, it's a group of people who come together kind of like a book club and with a common interest. In our case, it's giving back to the community. So we pool our charitable dollars and make grants locally is our focus. Our particular circle is co-ed, so it's men and women. There are a lot of women's funds across the country, Black women's funds, but we came together 15 years ago and formed what we call NGAP and make grants annually. We also have found power in our ability to convene and to provide civic leadership. So on the funding equity conversations here in Charlotte, North Carolina, we really are leading that conversation and driving initiatives here. And our relationships to people in the community and our proximity and line of sight on our community has been really, really helpful. I'm proud that our membership spans from 27 to roughly 72. So it's multi-generational and it's people who work in philanthropy, program officers and directors at presidents of foundations, former presidents of foundations, as well as people who work in the healthcare sector, educators, entrepreneurs. It's really a cross section of folks and we all learn from each other. In fact, last night, we had our meeting, which was supposed to be in person, one of the first ones in person, but we had to go virtual yet again for an abundance of safety. And we decided on our grant selections this year. So we've been in the midst of our grant cycle and came together. We don't vote. Our group chooses to work through consensus. So we talked it out and have awarded grants to 3 Black-led, Black-founded nonprofits here in Charlotte. So I'm super proud of that work. And there's been a growth of giving circles across the country and greater interest, particularly among Black people. And so if you're curious about giving circles, give me a call. I'm happy to share more. And if you're looking to join one, there's probably a Black giving circle in your community that you can connect to.
Love it.
And Jocelyn, can I just say how inspiring it is to see Valaida, to see your joy, right? And that we can't forget that giving is a joyous action, right?
Yeah.
And it's so apparent in how you talk about the work and you talk about the camaraderie and the fellowship of your giving circle, that it is truly, it's an act of compassion and an act of joy. And I love that about this giving work.
Yeah. No, when we were writing the guide, I remember looking up some data on how giving and also being altruistic affects your health, your mental health, right? And so I think, again, we know this intuitively, but if you're feeling down, do something for someone else and, it can lift your spirits, right? So I knew this was going to happen and we only have 5 more minutes left. So let's wrap up with kind of a more rapid fire style question. And this is going to be practical. So what advice would you give donors or funders who want to use giving circles, traditional philanthropy or impact investing to build power for Black women and girls? And Ashindi, why don't you kick us off? Oh, you're on mute.
I started off so fast too. I thought right away. I read this somewhere. I don't remember whose advice it was, but it was basically like, if you want to make change, join a group. And I really believe that, like, find the people who believe what you believe. I think Valaida's giving circles are great. Donors of Color is a great place for high net worth people of color who want to do systemic racial justice, but find the thing that fits you. I mean, there are investing groups, but I would definitely say, like, if this is the change you want to make, like, find someone that's close to that and then stand for Black women and girls where you are.
Love it.
And I want to say, in terms of impact investing, there are lots of groups you can join. I would check out online Mission Investors Exchange. There's an organization called Tonic Institute for individuals with lots of resources and lots of information. Confluence Philanthropy would be another, and these are all network organizations that have lots of information about impact investing as a tool for being able to give back to communities. So check them out.
Yeah, I agree. Find your squad, and then I would add that focus relentlessly on funding equity. You gave some statistics earlier about the underfunding, the underinvestment that really is appalling to not only Black-led organizations, but Black-led organizations focused on women and girls, Black women and girls. So read up, get educated around funding equity, and help be a champion and connect with organizations that are led by and serving Black women and girls, and invest in them with your time, your talent, your treasure, and whatever else you have to bring to the mix.
That sounds great. And Valaida, where can we find your exhibit these days, or your book?
Right. You can contact me for the book. It's also available on Amazon.com. It's Giving Back, a tribute to generations of African-American philanthropists.
Nice.
And the exhibit, of course, in the pandemic, isn't currently being displayed, but we're working on some exhibitions, hopefully in Chicago in the next year or so. So stay tuned for that. And appreciate your asking.
Yeah, of course. And then Ashindi, do you want to drop your stuff in the chat, or just say how people can call you and get involved with you?
Sure.
Actually, you know what? If you say it, it's probably better, because I might have made the chat only for the four of us.
We have a website, donorsofcolor.org. And for our political work, it's donorsofcoloraction.org. Okay. And there's also a climate website specifically that I think is climate.donorsofcolor.org. So those are the places to reach us.
Great. And Lisa, you gave us some great tips. Yes.
Yes. And so I would encourage you to check out those organizations as an individual interested in impact investing. And I also want to be responsive to the question in the chat about how do you influence the conversation.
Great.
And, this is our moment, right? Like, as Black women, there's more attention around racial diversity and gender diversity than there ever has been before. And sometimes the easiest thing to do is ask a question. And I find that to be a really effective way to influence a conversation. To ask the question, why are there no people of color on this board? Why are there no people of color on the senior management team? And to see what kind of answers you get as people are underwriting and evaluating philanthropic opportunities. To just ask the question can really influence the conversation.
Yeah. Well, so as we wrap up, I really want to thank each of you today, Ashindi Maxton, Lisa Hall, Valaida Fullwood, just for your time. I know you're all really busy women, and your brilliance, and for the work you're doing to make the world better for Black women and girls, right? And then just let folks know that we will have the recording available if you want to review it or share it with other colleagues or friends. And if you want to see more webinars like this, or just get more information on giving, please visit givingcompass.org. And we'll say goodbye.
Thank you. And thanks to
Bye,
Giving
guys.
Compass for having us.
Thanks so much for
Yes.
having us and hosting us, Jocelyn, and
Yes,
giving
thank
Compass.
you.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Bye.